Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, Pope Francis, leader of the Roman Catholic Church, has died. He was 88 years old. Leaders across the world, including President Trump, mourn his passing, remembering him for his compassion despite occasional differences in opinion. We look back at the legacy of Pope Francis and ahead at what's next for the Roman Catholic Church. The U.S. and China trading fresh warnings. Beijing threatens countries against cooperating with the U.S., and President Trump calls out cheating behavior around tariffs. Iris Tao at the White House. Nuclear talks continued between the U.S. and Iran over the weekend, but Iran is also meeting with leaders of the Chinese Communist Party. Jack Bradley reports. Israel releases the findings of its investigation into 15 medics reportedly killed in the Gaza Strip, but a Palestinian official says the Israeli response was not enough. Jason Perry has the update. President Trump says there's a very good chance Russia and Ukraine will make a peace deal as early as this week. Arian Pazdar has more on the talks and what Russia says about Trump's timeline.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Pope Francis died today at the age of 88. The Vatican revealed the cause of death was a stroke, followed by a coma and irreversible cardiocirculatory collapse. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the life and legacy of the first Latin American leader of the Roman Catholic Church.
Carissimi fratelli et sorelle.
Dear brothers and sisters, it is with profound sadness I must announce the death of our Holy Father Francis.
Devo annunciare la morte.
Hours before he died, Pope Francis emerged on Easter Sunday to bless the thousands of people in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican.
Buona Pasqua.
The former cardinal from Argentina had been in hospital for several weeks. He had recently survived a serious bout of double pneumonia. Francis was elected Pope on March 13, 2013. He was immediately praised as a man of humility, making his first appearance in simple white vestments instead of the more opulent royal vestments of his predecessors. His first Easter, he changed a Holy Thursday ritual where the pontiff washes and kisses the feet of 12 clergymen in remembrance of Jesus' washing the feet of the 12 apostles. Pope Francis instead washed and kissed the feet of 12 prisoners, including some Muslims. The following year, he presided over the marriage of several couples who had been living together and had children out of wedlock. Some of his teachings, specifically on the blessing of homosexual couples, his stance against the U.S.'s crackdowns on illegal immigration, and his criticisms of capitalism, sparked dissent among Christians. He also received criticism over a controversial deal with Communist China. The agreement gave Beijing influence over bishop appointments. He leaves behind a global church 1.3 billion strong and a legacy that strove to inspire social and political reforms in and out of that church, rooted in his interpretation of Jesus Christ's teachings on mercy. While he struggled with internal dissent, Francis drew huge crowds on his many foreign travels as he promoted interfaith dialogue and peace. Pope Francis's chosen resting place is the Basilica of St. Mary Major, a site dear to him because of his devotion to the Mother Mary. In a break with tradition, Francis will become the first pope in over a century to be buried outside the Vatican. Pope Francis's funeral is still expected to take place in St. Peter's Square, in front of the Basilica of St. Peter, where most of his predecessors rest. In the coming days, more than 100 cardinals from around the world will be called to gather in the Vatican Palace to elect the new pope. Completely secluded from the outside world, they will pray, discuss, and vote in a secret ballot. This election requires a 2/3 majority vote and can take several days with up to 4 votes happening in a single day. Ballots are burned after each vote, sending a smoke signal to the outside world. Black smoke means no majority. White smoke means a majority has been reached. Once the winning candidate accepts the position, the news is declared Habemus Papam, which translates as, "We have a pope." Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Parisians and tourists alike gathered at Notre-Dame today to mourn Pope Francis, some of them remembering a leader they called humble, simple, and devoted to the poor. NTD's international correspondent David Vance reports from Paris.
Notre-Dame's bell tolled 88 times this morning to mourn Pope Francis's death. Many visitors paid tribute to the Pope inside the cathedral. Some of them learned about his passing on the spot. On Sunday, 88-year-old Francis made his first prolonged public appearance since being discharged on March 23 after a 38-day hospital stay for pneumonia. Some tourists expressed shock at the sudden news.
He was looking good yesterday, so I was really sad this morning. That's why I really wanted to come and pay my respects here at Notre-Dame. And to see his portrait here, in this place, I was very emotional.
French President Emmanuel Macron said he remembers the Pope as someone who always stood with the most vulnerable, a view echoed by many visitors at Notre-Dame.
The way we had hoped after his hospitalization that he'd be better and able to largely return to his duties. Look, I'm not Catholic, but I admired the Pope because he was a man of the people. He demonstrated care for the smallest and loneliest human beings.
It's an extraordinarily sad time. He was such a powerful advocate for the poor, for the oppressed, for all those who are disadvantaged, and he saw through a lot of the bureaucracy that hampers the church, and I think he was trying to bring it back to its fundamental goals of peace.
I saw him when I went to Roma. He was ready to brave security to just greet with a child or an elderly person. And that's something that really impressed me about him, as he was a very simple and humble man.
The Eiffel Tower's light will remain off tonight as a final tribute to Pope Francis. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance paid tribute to Pope Francis today. Trump wrote on Truth Social, "Rest in peace, Pope Francis," adding, "May God bless him and all who loved him." Vice President J.D. Vance also reacted to the news, saying, quote, "My heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world who loved him." He added that he'll always remember Pope Francis for a homily he gave in the very early days of COVID. The White House this morning also shared an initial memorial post for the late Pope, writing "Rest in peace" alongside photos of Trump and Vance meeting the pontiff. Pope Francis was the first pope to address a joint meeting of the U.S. Congress in 2015. And leaders across the world are sending condolences. They say they'll remember Pope Francis for his compassion, despite occasional differences in opinion. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has this report.
Leaders across the world mourned the death of Pope Francis. Javier Milei, president of the Pope's home nation Argentina, said he felt profound sorrow. He said that despite differences that seem minor today, having been able to know him in his goodness and wisdom was a true honor. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said he left a great legacy.
May he rest in peace, and our embrace and affection to the whole world, and particularly to the Catholics of Mexico.
Colombian President Gustavo Petro said he lost a great friend, while Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said humanity is losing a voice of respect and welcome for others. With an ear to Europe, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said she had the privilege of enjoying his friendship, advice and teachings, calling him a great man, a great shepherd. French President Emmanuel Macron said Pope Francis had always sided with the most vulnerable and fragile with a lot of humility. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said the Pope's leadership was courageous, yet always came from a place of deep humility, while King Charles said he'd be remembered for his compassion. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz recalled him as a reconciling and a warm-hearted person. Israel's President Isaac Herzog said he hopes the Pope's prayers for peace in the Middle East and for the safe return of the hostages in Gaza will soon be answered. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said Pope Francis leaves a legacy of faith and service.
We at United Nations were greatly inspired by his commitment to the goals and ideals of our organization, a message I was honored to convey in my meetings with him as Secretary General.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said Francis had actively promoted the development of dialogue between the Russian Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky recalled how the Pope prayed for peace in Ukraine for the Ukrainians. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News.
And President Trump announced on Truth Social today that he and the First Lady will be attending the funeral of Pope Francis in Rome. Turning now to a fresh escalation of trade tensions between the U.S. and China, the communist regime warning other countries against making deals with the U.S. as President Trump warns Beijing against cheating and vows to reach deals with Europe. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
We're going to ultimately have a deal with anyone.
As President Trump expresses optimism toward making trade deals with countries that benefit the U.S., China is vowing retaliation against countries that follow U.S.'s lead to isolate Beijing. But such threats have not stopped the White House from repeatedly hiking tariffs on China, now to 145%, while pausing tariffs on other countries. The administration is also reportedly asking U.S. partners during negotiations to limit dealings with China. President Trump last week stressing he believes that the U.S. has the upper hand.
An additional statement that he just shared with me: China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them. They need our money.
On Sunday, President Trump warned trading partners over cheating over his sweeping tariffs, listing 8 ways they could do so, including currency manipulation, dumping below cost, IP theft, and transshipping through third countries. The administration has repeatedly criticized China for these exact behaviors. Meanwhile, despite China's attempt to interfere with U.S. talks with trading partners, President Trump says his talks with Europe are going well.
I think we're doing really well. We're all set. There's a little transition, and that's going to happen. But ultimately, we're going to be the strongest that we've ever been as a nation.
The Mexican president today also called her talks with Trump last week on tariffs very productive. Meanwhile, in other news, the president today offering full-throated backing of his defense secretary after reports alleging that Pete Hegseth shared Houthis' attack plans details in another Signal group chat, this time with his family.
Doing a great job. It's just fake news. They just bring up stories. I guess it sounds like disgruntled employees. You know, he was put there to get rid of a lot of bad people, and that's what he's doing. So you don't always have friends when you do that.
Some Democratic lawmakers are demanding Pete Hegseth step down, but the White House denies reports that they are looking for any replacement, and Hegseth himself taking aim at the media.
And anonymous smears from disgruntled former employees on old news doesn't matter.
A National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, took responsibility for the Signal group chat back in March that inadvertently included an editor from The Atlantic magazine. President Trump said he called the latest reporting old stuff and also challenged the media to find something new. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Vice President J.D. Vance today holding talks with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on tariffs. Vance reportedly met with Modi at his residence in New Delhi. India is trying to avoid U.S. tariffs and negotiate a trade deal with the Trump administration. Modi's office reported the two leaders made significant progress in negotiations toward an anticipated bilateral trade deal to be finalized this year. The U.S. is India's largest trading partner, while China is India's chief rival in the region. President Trump has paused tariffs against most countries except for China. Vance's visit comes one day after his meeting with Pope Francis on Easter Sunday, just hours before the pontiff died. Second Lady Usha Vance, whose parents are from India, is accompanying the vice president on his 4-day visit to India, along with their 3 children. And how is the ongoing trade war between the U.S. and China affecting China's trading partners? How will those trading partners respond? And what is China's long game in its retaliation against the U.S.? Join us for NTD's Capital Report with Steve Lance at 7 p.m. Eastern Time for insights from Yun Sun, director of the China program at the Stimson Center. U.S. and Iran talks will continue this coming Saturday for the 3rd weekend in a row. Presidential envoy Steve Witkoff is set to speak again with Iran's foreign minister. Both leaders say the past weekend's discussions were productive. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
U.S. and Iranian officials are holding their next round of nuclear talks in Oman on Saturday. Both countries said that they made progress in their second round of talks this past Saturday in Rome, and we don't know the specifics of the negotiations. President Trump has made clear that he wants to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, but it's unclear if he's willing to allow them to maintain any nuclear power plants at all.
I'm for stopping Iran, very simply, from having a nuclear weapon. They can't have a nuclear weapon. I want Iran to be great and prosperous and terrific.
Before these talks take place, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is meeting with the Chinese Communist Party leaders in Beijing on Tuesday. Now, he went to Russia last week also to discuss the nuclear issue as well, meeting with President Putin. And this comes as tensions are high between the CCP and the U.S. Other than historically high tariffs, Trump has also, for the first time, sanctioned Chinese oil refineries for purchasing billions of dollars worth of oil from Iran. Now, these refineries in China are giving a lifeline to Iran's economy. The CCP is also sanctioning several members of Congress, other officials, and heads of NGOs over recent Hong Kong policies. The regime didn't specify who exactly sanctioned specifically, but this is in response to U.S. sanctions last month on 6 Chinese and Hong Kong officials over their silencing of pro-democracy activists on U.S. soil. Now, the U.S. is meanwhile saying that China is directly supporting attacks on U.S. interests by Iran-backed Houthi terrorists.
There is a Chinese company providing satellite imagery to the Houthis. The Houthis. Beijing support, by the way, of that company, the satellite company, even after we've engaged in discussions with them about this. The fact that they continue to do this is unacceptable.
The fact that these talks are taking place between the U.S. and Iran shows a major shift in relations between the two countries. They've been long hostile for decades to each other since the 1979 Islamic Revolution and the U.S. Embassy hostage crisis. Now, Trump withdrew from an earlier nuclear deal with Iran back in 2018, and Trump has threatened bombing Iran's nuclear sites if negotiations don't pan out. Iran, on their end, has threatened to pursue an atomic weapon. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Israel has released the findings of its investigation into the reported deaths of 15 medics in the Gaza Strip. But an official from the Palestinian Red Crescent says that the Israeli response was not enough. NTD's Jason Perry has a Middle East update.
On Sunday, Israel released the findings of their investigation into the reported deaths of 15 medics in the Gaza Strip. As seen in this video, emergency vehicles had their emergency lights on when they stopped next to a vehicle on the side of the road. That's when Israeli troops reportedly opened fire on them, killing 15 people. The findings of the investigation say that an Israeli deputy battalion commander thought the emergency vehicles were being used by Hamas terrorists, and he ordered troops to open fire on them. The Israel Defense Forces say they have since dismissed that commander from his position due to his role in the shooting and for not giving an accurate report of the incident. A brigade commander was also reprimanded. On Monday, Israel's government spokesperson David Mencer explained.
The IDF has expressed regret for harm to uninvolved civilians and reaffirmed its commitment to learning from the incident to prevent reoccurrence. In particular, regarding the protection of medical personnel in combat zones, the investigation's findings will be reviewed by the Military Prosecutor's Office.
The chairman of the Palestinian Red Crescent responded, saying he didn't think that was a sufficient response to the killing of 15 medical staff and civil defense personnel. However, Israel said that 6 of those killed were Hamas terrorists and that Hamas is known for using ambulances to conduct terrorist activity. Meanwhile, the new U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, said an official from the World Health Organization asked him to put pressure on Israel to bring more humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. On Monday, Huckabee responded, suggesting in a post on X that, quote, "We put the pressure where it really belongs, on Hamas."
So we call upon Hamas to sign an agreement so that humanitarian aid can flow into Gaza to the people who desperately need it. When that happens and hostages are released, which is an urgent matter for all of us, then we hope that that humanitarian aid will flow and flow freely.
Meanwhile, a spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces was in the newly established Morag corridor that separates Rafah from the rest of the Gaza Strip.
I want to clarify the goal of the operation, to increase pressure on Hamas in order to bring the hostages home.
59 hostages are reportedly still held in the Gaza Strip, only 24 of whom are believed to still be alive. Jason Perry, NTD News.
President Trump says there's a very good chance Russia and Ukraine will make a peace deal as early as this week. This as both sides accuse each other of thousands of violations of an Easter truce. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the war update.
Ukrainian soldiers observed Easter Sunday amid ongoing fighting between Kyiv and Moscow. On Saturday, Russia and Ukraine agreed on an Easter Sunday ceasefire, but on Sunday night, both sides accused each other of violating that truce thousands of times. A Ukrainian medic says the fighting never stopped.
There was no ceasefire, and there were a lot of injuries. There were a lot of firearm wounds, injuries caused by mine explosions, and more.
But still, President Trump took to social media on Sunday afternoon, saying hopefully Russia and Ukraine will make a deal this week. Both will then start to do big business with the United States. On Monday, a Kremlin spokesperson was asked about Trump's timeline for a peace deal.
I would like not to comment on that now, especially not about the timing of a deal. President Putin and the Russian side remain open to seeking a peaceful settlement.
Also on Monday, President Trump was asked about a plan for Ukraine to recognize Crimea as part of Russia.
I will be giving you a full detail over the next 3 days, but we had very good meetings on Ukraine and Russia.
He added that there is a good chance Kyiv and Moscow will manage to close a peace deal this week. Now this comes as U.S. delegates are set to travel to Europe this week. They're scheduled to hold talks in the UK. Special envoy to Russia and Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, talked about the plans while on Fox News. Take a look.
We talk about going forward with a potential ceasefire in the near term, and that's the reason we're returning to London this week to actually lock that down. And I think there's tremendous opportunities.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that this Wednesday, Ukrainian representatives will be working in London. According to Kellogg, a potential 30-day ceasefire could include sea, air, and land activity, as well as industrial targets. This could then lead to a permanent peace deal. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Coming up, the Secret Service is investigating after Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem's bag was stolen over the weekend. Inside, thousands of dollars in cash and her DHS access badge. And more Democratic lawmakers travel to El Salvador to push for the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia from a prison in his home country. Luis Martinez reports from Capitol Hill after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Secret Service is investigating after Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem fell victim to a crime Sunday night. Her bag, including $3,000 in cash, was stolen. According to two sources familiar with the incident, including a law enforcement source, it happened while Noem was eating dinner at a downtown Washington, D.C. restaurant. The Secret Service reviewed security camera footage at the restaurant. It showed an unknown white male wearing a medical mask take Noem's bag and leave the restaurant. The law enforcement source said the thief got away with Noem's driver's license, medication, apartment keys, passport, DHS access bag, makeup, blank checks, and the cash. Four House Democrats traveled to El Salvador to advocate for the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia without congressional approval. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on the story.
A fact that our president does not recognize the branches of government and the balances of power. This is what we all have been calling a constitutional crisis. We are here to release Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
That was Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Dexter, who alongside three other House Democrats traveled to El Salvador to advocate for the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Salvadoran national who entered the U.S. illegally and was deported for having ties to MS-13, a foreign terrorist organization.
President Trump made it very clear. I'm going to get rid of the gang members, the murderers, the rapists, the terrorists, and this is part of that process. And others like the senator from Maryland are doubling down on an illegal alien when they won't talk about all the Americans who have been harmed by illegal aliens.
Last week, Senator Chris Van Hollen, the Democrat from Maryland, traveled to El Salvador and met with Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
He was sad and traumatized that he was being in prison
because he has committed no crimes. And that goes to the heart of this issue, because he's being denied his due process rights.
This illegal alien, who is not a resident of the U.S., he is a citizen of El Salvador, actually did have due process in an asylum hearing where his request for asylum was rejected.
Over the weekend, the Republican-led House Oversight Committee denied the request from the 4 House Democrats who traveled to El Salvador to travel as a congressional delegation, and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has distanced himself from their actions.
I'm going to really focus on trying to defeat Republican incumbents so we can take back control of the House of Representatives and begin the process of ending this national nightmare that's being visited upon us by far-right extremism.
Congress is in recess until April 28th, and Republican lawmakers plan on marking up a reconciliation bill before Memorial Day and also voting on rescissions to make the DOGE spending cuts permanent. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
A New York jury today found Nadine Menendez guilty in her federal bribery trial. This comes after the conviction of her husband, former New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, on similar crimes. Menendez had pleaded not guilty to 15 charges, including conspiracies to commit bribery and extortion. Prosecutors argued she and her husband were partners in crime. They both were accused of accepting cash, gold bars, and a luxury car in exchange for political favors. Jurors began deliberating Friday afternoon and reached their verdict earlier today. She will be sentenced in June. The same month, her husband is expected to report to prison to begin serving an 11-year sentence. The 26-year-old Texan behind the 2019 shooting massacre at an El Paso Walmart pleaded guilty Monday to capital murder. Patrick Crucius received an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. Crucius had already been sentenced to 90 consecutive life sentences after he pleaded guilty in 2023 to hate crime and weapons charges. Federal prosecutors who were under the Biden administration at the time declined to seek the death penalty. Authorities say Crucius admitted that he specifically targeted Hispanic people when he opened fire in the border town Walmart, killing 23. Coming up, a potential shakeup in the tech world that could impact search engines and more. The DOJ wants Google to sell off its Chrome browser. David Lamb reports from Silicon Valley. And amid economic uncertainty, how can you put yourself in the best financial position to weather short-term changes while also setting yourself up for long-term stability? Ted Rossman, senior industry analyst at Bankrate, joins us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A potential shakeup in the tech world that could impact how we surf the web. Google was back in court today for its antitrust case, which could result in a breakup of the company. NTD's David Lamb reports.
Tech company Google returned to court on Monday after ruling found that the company was liable for running an illegal monopoly. The DOJ is asking a federal judge for the following remedies to help restore competition. Ban Google from making multi-billion-dollar deals with Apple and other tech companies that shield its search engine. Make Google share user data with rivals. Enforce the sale of Google's Chrome browser. In its opening arguments, antitrust enforcers also urged the court to impose forward-looking remedies to prevent Google from using AI to further its market share. But Google's attorney, John Schmidtlein, said that the court should take a much lighter touch. He said that the government's heavy-handed proposals wouldn't boost competition, but instead unfairly reward other rivals with lesser technology. The attorney said Google won its place in the market fair and square. In 2024, a federal judge ruled that Google had been making anti-competitive deals to lock in its search engine as the go-to place for digital information on the iPhone, personal computers, and other widely used devices. This includes those running on its own Android software. Now, Google intends to file an appeal on the court's decision from last year, but can't do so until these remedy hearings are completed. Now, after closing arguments are presented in late May, the judge plans to make his decision on the remedies before Labor Day. David Lamb, NTD News.
Amid tariff tensions, stock markets tanked again today, and the value of the U.S. dollar also fell. What should Americans do with their money right now? Joining us now to discuss is Ted Rossman, senior industry analyst at Bankrate. Ted, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you here. Now, Wired magazine reports that price tracking firm Keepa last week saw an above average rise in prices for certain Amazon items, but mostly under 1%. Given the economic uncertainty right now, there are reports of so-called panic buying. What is the financially prudent thing to do right now?
Honestly, the best approach is probably to filter out a lot of the noise and not make any major changes. We want to stay the course with our long-term investments. I know it's disconcerting when the market goes down, but in the long run, the market has been a great wealth creator, and oftentimes the best days follow the worst days. So as long as you're appropriately invested for your risk tolerance and time horizon, you want to stay the course there. Same thing with purchases. I know some people are stocking up in advance of what they think could be some price increases. Just don't overdo it. I mean, if you are in the market for something, especially a bigger ticket item like a car, let's say, I mean, if you know that you need a new car within the next month or two, maybe it makes sense to accelerate that a little bit. But if you could drive your existing car for another year or two, I wouldn't be in a rush to sign up for an $800 a month car payment just because you fear it might go higher in the future.
And on that note, what are some practical steps Americans can be taking right now to secure their finances?
Take a good look at your investments in the context of the long haul. It's often recommended that you have something like 100 minus your age in stocks, or maybe 110 minus your age. That would be the percentage that you have in stocks. So for example, even a 60-year-old, they might be 40 or 50% in stocks because there is a long-term growth potential there. If you need to do something, rebalancing might actually be smart. There's a chance that your bond holdings may have grown in value, your stocks may have fallen. Getting that back to the desired mix might actually make sense. But for the most part, we don't want to make any drastic changes. You really want to have the long view in mind. Try to take that perspective rather than overreacting to short-term events.
I want to zoom in on that, Ted, because with these stock market fluctuations, many people are seeing changes in their retirement pensions. Any tips on what people should be doing there?
You definitely want to take a good look at what you're likely to have coming in. Think about what your expenses are going to be. It's often recommended to withdraw no more than 4% of your portfolio every year, and then you can adjust that for inflation. You want to be mindful of what you might get from Social Security or a pension if you're lucky enough to have one. A lot of retirements these days are going to be self-funded through 401ks and IRAs and other investment vehicles. A lot of times people have different tax buckets they can draw from. Maybe you have some Roth investments that have already been taxed. Sometimes, especially as you get older and you have more assets, it might make sense to meet with a financial advisor and just make sure that you're on track with all of this. But again, keep the long view in mind. I mean, hopefully you're going to have a 20 or 30 year retirement and time to ride up the ups and downs. Same thing with younger workers. If you're in your 20s or 30s, every dollar you invest for retirement could be $20 or $30 or $40 by the time you retire. So you don't want to time the market. You just want to stick it out.
And back to the car example, the president wants Fed Chair Powell to cut rates. So if one is financing for a new car or new home, should one, wait to see if interest rates come down?
It's hard to time the stock market, and it's hard to time the interest rate markets as well. We've even gotten some head fakes recently where it looked like mortgage rates were coming down, and then they actually went back up a little bit. Right now, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate is just slightly under 7%. Car loans, more like 8% on average for used cars, about 7.5% for new. We're not expecting dramatic changes to the rate landscape this year. So, rates may drift a little bit lower, especially as we get towards the back half of the year. But this is another one where you want to keep your eyes on the long-term prize. Honestly, it's not the best time to buy a house, but it might be a suitable time for you if you're planning to stick around, if you have enough of a down payment, if you have a cushion for repairs and maintenance. There's a saying about date the rate, marry the house. There's a chance that you could refinance in a year or two, let's say, if rates fall. I just wouldn't put all my eggs in that basket, because what if rates don't come down? You want to make sure that you're prepared for the proverbial rainy day. But, look, people are out there buying houses and cars and making some of these big decisions. It's just, I would say it's better to buy a little late than a little early. You don't want to rush into something and then regret it later on.
And on that note, some economists have been warning of a recession. Others note Wall Street is in Main Street and that economic indicators aren't as bad as the markets seem to suggest. What is your message to those who are afraid there's a recession coming? What other indicators should they be looking at?
There's that saying about make hay while the sun shines. I mean, this is a time to load up your emergency fund if you can, pay down credit card debt. These are good things in any climate, but especially if you're worried that there might be some turbulent waters ahead. The job market's actually been really solid. That's been a silver lining that's propped up consumer spending. A lot of consumer economic activity has been better than you might think. Sentiment has been really depressed, but actual spending has been better. GDP growth has been better than expected. Tariffs are a big wild card, and that has the potential to throw things into reverse a bit. But in general, the past few years, there's been a pretty gloomy economic mood, and yet a lot of the end results have been more positive. This also plays out differently for different households. There's that whole K-shaped economy thing where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. I mean, it does depend where you are on that spectrum, but in general, the more you can save, the more you can pay down high-cost debt, that'll serve you well.
A lot of factors indeed. Ted Rossman, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Thanks.
Coming up, perseverance in the face of hardship. A spiritual group in D.C. commemorates a historic peaceful appeal that preceded a nationwide persecution in China. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass delivers her State of the City address, touching on wildfire recovery, homelessness, and a major budget deficit. Christina Corona has the key takeaways after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. April 25th will mark the 26th anniversary of a historic peaceful appeal in China. Falun Gong practitioners in D.C. are commemorating this occasion by raising awareness about an ongoing persecution campaign still happening in China today. NTD's Sam Wong has more on the story.
I'm here outside the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., where a group of Falun Gong practitioners has gathered behind me. They're here to commemorate a historical event widely believed to be the prelude to a nationwide persecution. Dressed in yellow shirts and doing meditation, the sight bears resemblance to what happened in the heart of Beijing nearly 26 years ago. On April 25, 1999, around 10,000 Falun Gong practitioners gathered peacefully outside the Chinese Communist Party's central headquarters, Zhongnanhai. They were appealing against harassment and suppression of their peers by local authorities in a nearby city.
I remember around April 25, 1999, a fellow practitioner told me that authorities had started arresting people in Tianjin. We all went together to the city hall to appeal and tell them that Falun Gong is good and that they shouldn't arbitrarily detain people.
But what ensued was an escalation that no one foresaw. 3 months later, Beijing ordered a nationwide persecution against Falun Gong, subjecting up to 100 million Chinese to systematic abuse, incarceration, even deaths in custody. So my uncle had started practicing Falun Gong in 1997, and in 2001, he was apprehended by the police and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Many Falun Gong practitioners still face imprisonment, and inside those prisons, they might face all kinds of tortures, brainwashing, and mental or physical abuse. Up until April 2025, Minghui.org has reported more than 5,000 Falun Gong practitioners killed inside China, but that total is believed to be a tiny fraction of the actual death toll. The actual number is near impossible to discern because of the regime's systematic efforts to control information and cover up its abuses. According to several independent reports, Chinese authorities are accused of killing tens of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners to supply the regime's organ transplant industry. The crime against humanity is condemned by human rights groups and government officials around the world.
Many of my friends around me were persecuted to death in prison. So I believe we're duty-bound to stand up today and call on more people to step forward to help stop the CCP's persecution of Falun Gong.
More than a quarter century has passed since the start of the persecution. Falun Gong practitioners are still committed to the same principle they've held dear for decades, the values of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, as well as making their voices heard through peaceful means. Sam Wang, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass gave her State of the City address, sharing her top priorities as the city recovers from wildfires and faces budget challenges. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass delivered her State of the City address outlining her top priorities from wildfire recovery to homelessness and the city's budget crisis.
We feel it every day. The strain of the housing crisis, the tragedy of the homelessness crisis. We worry about public safety and the unpredictability of our streets.
Bass announced new steps to speed up rebuilding after January's wildfires, including a self-certification program and a new AI tool to streamline permitting.
We will launch an initiative to start using innovative AI technology to accelerate and support the city's permit process. Now, if successful, we will take both of these new initiatives citywide to accelerate building everywhere.
Bass also highlighted recent progress on homelessness.
And homelessness is down, and that includes a 10% reduction in street homelessness and a 38% reduction in makeshift structures and tents. We are moving thousands more people from the streets before we took office, and more Angelenos are being moved into permanent housing than ever before.
But the mayor also warned of tough financial times ahead, with the city facing an $800 million deficit caused by overspending and lower tax revenues. Bass says LA is cutting costs, delaying projects, and eliminating positions.
My proposed budget, unfortunately, includes layoffs, which is a decision of absolute last resort. The city attorney and I will be in Sacramento this week to meet with legislative leaders and advocate for resources while also working to manage the increasing liabilities.
This comes as Bass's approval ratings have declined. A new survey from UCLA's Luskin School of Public Affairs, which was taken between February 23rd and March 9th, shows her favorable ratings dropped from 42% last year to 37% this year. Analysts believe the decline may be tied to her response to January's deadly wildfires. Christina Corona, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.